Colony in Space is probably the serial which best sums up a lot of the problems with this season of the show. Now, there is definitely stuff to be enjoyed here, but I think it's hindered by the season it was made for. The serial does change up the format a lot though, as it finally takes the Doctor away from Earth after nearly 2 seasons of being stranded, which does give this serial something the previous serials didn't have. So let's get into the plot and find out why this serial is such a mixed bag. So we begin with a big change up, as the serial starts off with a discussion between some Time Lords who are talking about some information concerning a doomsday machine, which has been stolen by the Master. So yes, the Master is the villain again, and I'm not even going to try and disguise it, as the serial doesn't. So while the serial does introduce that the Master will be the villain at the very beginning, he doesn't show up until more than halfway through. The Master's presence in the serial is something I'll have to discuss separately, as I think his presence in the story needs to be discussed once I've established the setting. So as mentioned, the serial finally takes the third Doctor away from Earth, with him being sent by the Time Lords 400 years into the future into the planet Eusareus, where a human colony is trying to survive. So before talking about the colony, I want to talk about the opening scene at Unit HQ, which is one of only 2 scenes set there, with the other being at the end. The scene mostly serves to remind the audience that the Master isn't on Earth anymore, with Unit having problems trying to capture him.
This agent happens to be particularly reliable, Doctor. I'll let you know what he says, if you're interested.
Ah, now you've offended him.
Well, look what happened last time. The man they arrested turned out to be the Spanish ambassador.
But it also serves to establish that the Doctor isn't completely restrained to Earth anymore, after the previous serial. Now I say after the previous serial, but the story kind of ignores that, with the Doctor saying he's built a new dematerialisation circuit, instead of having his old one repaired. So there's a lot to unpack with this one, notably that it basically erases a lot of what's been established with the Doctor's exile, as it was only in the previous serial that the Master made the circuit usable again. And also, if the Doctor was capable of making a new one, then why was it ever a problem, and what was the point anyway, as it was working again? The way the serial presents it is that the Doctor's only problem was the circuit, which wasn't really a problem anyway, and he just seems to choose to remain on Earth after this serial, as there are no lines that address any other ways the Time Lords would stop him from escaping Earth. This basically ignores the memory problem that the Doctor has, which is definitely annoying. But with the Doctor now able to take off, we don't see that happen, and instead the Time Lords take control of the TARDIS and send the Doctor and Jo to the planet Eusareus. Due to this, the plot basically ignores what was said in this scene and its implications, which makes it weird why it's even there, or why it wasn't written to be consistent with the previous serial. The moment the two of them enter the TARDIS, it might as well have never been said. So let's get to Eusareus and the colony. So the colony is a human colony which settled over a year ago, but the colonists have been unable to grow any plants, and importantly food, for unknown reasons. Specifically, the soil should have been able to be used, but for whatever reason it can't. This is a part of the mystery that the serial builds, with that mystery being what happened to the planet. So there are multiple elements to this mystery, notably the inhabitants of the planet, which are a primitive group of telepathic aliens who have somehow survived on the planet. The mystery itself is more important in the later half of the serial, once the Doctor and Jo find the hidden city where the aliens live. The mystery element of the serial is there from the beginning, but it's not a big part until the very end. The main chunk is a battle between the colonists and the mining company for the planet. Now this is something very different to what we've seen in the show before, and is definitely interesting. Having these struggling colonists trying to find a way to survive, and then suddenly a super advanced ship arrives with orders to crack the planet, is very interesting, and the conflict that comes from this is engaging, especially since a second mystery is built into this, with colonists being killed by some creature, alongside the appearance of a man who claims to be from another colony which was wiped out by the native aliens. Now this mystery has a quite obvious answer, with the mining company having arrived days before they announced themselves, and have been attacking the colonists to scare them off. In fact, the earliest clue we have for this, which is also the big one, is the first shot of the planet, as we see their robot passing the area that the TARDIS lands on moments later. While the mystery itself isn't very compelling, with the answer of who's behind it being revealed at the beginning of episode 2, the way it affects the characters is, with the Doctor knowing basically the whole truth and says the enemy of the mining company, with them attempting to kill him. So now let's talk about the mining corporation in full. So the mining company is called the Interplanetary Mining Corporation, or IMC for short. So with this being a Malcolm Hulke script, it's clear from the get-go that these are the villains, and even the characters don't try to hide this fact, with them always showing antagonism towards the colonists. Of course, their attack on the colonists with the fake creature which kills several of them to scare them off is only the tip of the iceberg for how malicious they get. As the serial proceeds, their methods worsen. One notable occurrence is when they plan to kill Jo and a member of a colony named Winton by chaining them to an explosive. You also have the actions of their undercover agent, who have been causing fear in the colonists and trying to turn them against the native aliens, kill some of the colonists so he can sabotage their equipment. The serial also implies that this is something IMC does a lot to colonise worlds, and will use the court system to their advantage by gutting the planet while the dispute is going on. Ultimately, by the end, IMC is able to overthrow the colony and forces them off the planet, not caring if their rocket is even capable of flight. Fortunately, due to Winton, the colonists are able to take back the colony, but Ash the leader is forced to sacrifice himself to do it. This battle between the colonists and IMC is the serial at its most interesting, as its Hulk strength as a writer. Unfortunately, this idea becomes secondary to the Master plotline in a few episodes, and it becomes quite dull as it slowly moves along whenever the Master's scheme isn't on screen. I'll talk about the Master in a minute, but I want to talk about the commentary that Hulk is trying to write into this story. So there's a few things going on. Notably, we have elements of humanity's greed for wealth within IMC, with them going to extreme lengths to get paid, with the amounts being described as enough to retire on. There's also the hyper-overpopulation problem of Earth, with colonies starting to form on other worlds. But with the majority of humanity stuck on Earth due to the inability to escape the planet, with the colonies seeming to be private endeavours rather than humanity expanding into the stars, given that these elements are both present with capitalism still controlling the Earth, it's no wonder that humanity isn't naturally expanding into the stars, given that once off the planet it's harder to keep them under the iron fist of capitalism. It is easy to imagine this world where big companies are able to keep people on Earth, or perhaps on nearby worlds, and buying their products, by being the dominant space explorers who gut entire planets for the resources they need to keep people paying them. Now of course there is very little evidence for the colonies only being private endeavours, but given how this world is presented, with even older rockets being able to carry entire colonies, the idea that Earth's population problem is still expanding at this extreme rate does make me think that colonisation isn't a thing for the masses. But greed is definitely a big thing in this serial, as other than IMC, we also have the Master who's being driven by his own greed for power. So let's address the Master's presence now. So the Master came to this planet to find a doomsday machine so he could dominate the galaxy. He disguised himself as an Earth adjudicator to get power over both sides on the planet, which allowed him access to their information so he could locate the doomsday machine. Having the Master disguised and pretended to be in a position of power to gain what he needs really feels right for him, and is something we haven't really touched on yet, with Mind of Evil showing this a bit, and then Claws of Axos having it briefly. I think this idea should have been expanded on more, as it's only a brief part of the serial, as his late introduction means that things have to move on quickly, so it doesn't take long for IMC to think he's not the real adjudicator. One big thing for the Master is that we see his TARDIS for the first time. We were being a lot busier than the Doctor's as late. We were being full of stuff including cabinets to keep his evil schemes in, alongside 2 chambers for keeping prisoners in, plus a newly installed defence, which does a terrible job of keeping the Doctor out given you can easily slide under it. Also to show that this is the TARDIS of someone evil, the lighting is slightly darker. It's cool to see another TARDIS for the first time in 6 seasons, even if it gets broken into multiple times. So as explained before, the Master wants to find a doomsday machine so he can dominate the galaxy, which leads him to the hidden city which houses the weapon, but his plans ultimately fail when the Doctor sets the weapon to self-destruct, which destroys the entire city. Then obviously the Master escapes, and that's kind of it for the Master. The best scene of this section is towards the end, where the Doctor and the Master are in the control room, and the Master offers the Doctor the chance to rule beside him.
Look at all those planetary systems, Doctor. We could rule them all.
What for? What is the point?
The point is that one must rule or serve. That's a basic law of life. Why do you hesitate, Doctor?
You'll never understand, will you? I want to see the universe, not rule it.
Despite their differences, the Master believes the Doctor can be turned to his side, which does hint towards how close they might have been once upon a time. I think this is one of the more subtle moments of their history coming to the forefront. So let's talk about the Doomsday Machine itself and how it plays into the mystery of the planet. So the planet is essentially dying or dead because of a Doomsday Machine, which was made eons ago by the natives of the planet, who devolved due to the radiation emitted by it. This led to them seeing the machine as a religious symbol and their society being rebuilt around it. Now this is definitely an interesting idea, and the serial does spend some time on it, with there being 2 distinct races within the species. The green natives who grew up on the surface, alongside a nearly blind race of creatures who have massive brains. There is also a ruler of sorts, which is the only one capable of communicating with the Doctor and others, this creature being similar to the brainy ones but tiny and lives right above the reactor. There are some interesting ideas here, but I think it feels too much like a secondary plotline within the serial to be interesting. The fall of a society and how it devolved into a primitive one, which ended up viewing the machine that caused their destruction as something to be worshipped, is interesting. I especially like the written down history we get to see, as that's a cool way to quickly show it to us, but I would have liked it to be the main plotline in a serial instead of a secondary one, as it's far too interesting for that. So let's talk a bit about the Master's presence in the season, as I put it off in Claws, and so we have to talk about his overuse. So the Master is incredibly overused in this season, with him appearing in every serial, which does give us a unique season, but it also means that it becomes insanely repetitive, and if the Master wasn't both so interesting and well played, nobody would have been able to stand the character going forwards. While Claws needed the Master to be a part of its plot, and how that impacts the Doctor's exile overall, this serial really feels like he's there because he has to be in every story of the season. In some ways it feels like it was a 4-parter which became 6 when the Master was introduced, and so the Doomsday plotline was added on top. While I have no proof of this, the structure does support this, as the Master is not in the first half, and then once he arrives, the colony plotline begins to feel stretched out. The Master's overuse is really taking away from him, and he really shouldn't have appeared in this serial, at the very least. But I'll talk about this more in the season overview, but it needed to be addressed here and now. So let's talk about the Doctor and Jo. Beginning with Jo, she is quite strong here, feeling closer to her characterisation in Mind of Evil than the other serials. Having her in this new setting changes things up a lot for her, and yet she's still able to be quite useful and confident, despite this being the situation which would have made the most sense for her to be screaming and out of place. While there are moments where she is scared, there are many moments of her showing her smart side, alongside assisting others, notably during both of her escapes, the first from IMC and the next with the Doctor. That's not to mention that she assists Winton into breaking into the IMC ship, which leads to her capture, which is quite a brave thing for her. It's a good showing and doesn't make her feel too scared despite the alien setting, although her worst scene is when she gets the Doctor and herself captured by the Master while they're in his TARDIS. Plus she does have some strong emotional moments at the start when the TARDIS is first taking off and she doesn't want to go onto the alien planet. It's really good pairing up that companion who doesn't want to go outside compared to the Doctor who is desperate to. The Doctor is as strong as ever, with him really feeling back in his element as a traveller. With the format of the show limiting it to Earth, this serial really feels built up to, and there is a sense of excitement from the Doctor at the start. While this initial excitement kind of disappears as the serial proceeds, seeing Free in an alien environment really lets him shine, and doesn't have a unit backing him up or getting in the way. Also, I'm relatively sure that this is the first and maybe only time that the Doctor wears his Inverness cape throughout without him taking it off, which is something very minor but different. This serial also sees the return of the sonic screwdriver, with it taking on its iconic classic era design, even if it's not clearly shown. So this updated prop has a history to it, with it being made from old Jerry Anderson props, with the handle coming from the film Thunderbirds I'll Go, while the top was once a communicator in Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. It's fun to see that we're continuing to see the somewhat shared history between these shows, which was previously almost entirely for actors, but this won't be the last time that props cross over into the Doctor Who universe. But beyond just the prop, the serial expands on the Sonic's abilities a bit, with it being used by the Doctor to detect where the alarm is in the Master's TARDIS. I haven't actually mentioned the Brigadier due to his limited screen time, but he appears at the end when the TARDIS returns to Earth. This scene serves mostly as a comedy one, with the Brig not believing that the TARDIS was working due to it seemingly returning straight away. His scenes are both fun and a good way to have him included even without the serial being on Earth. But he does get maybe the best line of the serial, which although it does appear at the beginning, I've saved it till now.
Doctor, come back at once.
There isn't really anything to say about the guest cast, as I don't find any of them especially interesting on their own, with the exception of Caldwell, who is an IMC worker who turned his back on the company. This comes from the fact that he has more morals than the rest of the crew, and so doesn't agree with their methods, leading to his betrayal and ultimately remaining with the colony. There are plenty of scenes throughout which show his slow defection, with him constantly helping members of the colony, notably when he protects Winton from being shot by pretending to kill him. This does make him a more notable character than the rest, who feel a lot more one-note, but do have presence. We have a few returning actors here who haven't appeared in the show since the Hartnell era, with Caldwell being played by Bernard Kay and then Ash who was played by John Ringham. One notable thing concerning actors though is the character of Morgan, as director Michael E. Bryant wanted Susan Jameson to play the character, but the head of serials at the time didn't think a woman in that role would be suitable, as he thought it would have been inappropriate for a family audience, as he thought that the role would have introduced an unintended sexuality at times. Due to this happening late in the day, Jameson was already under contract and so was paid in full, but Bryant thought that this decision was both unenlightened and sexist, and I have to agree with him there. As for as great as Tony Cantor is as Morgan, it would have been great to have a female in this important role. So let's talk about the colorisation, which I should really call restoration for serials like these, as it wasn't colorised, but instead being restored with the reverse standards conversion method, just like Claws of Axos. So that's it for Colony in Space, a serial which is very different to what we've had so far in this era. It had a plot which had the potential to be interesting, but is spread too thinly, and really suffers from the master problem of this season. This serial really had potential, but for the Doctor's big return to the cosmos, it was a bit of a letdown. But with the Doctor back on Earth, a new threat arises, with an ancient godlike creature preparing to destroy the world. Next time, the demons.